Hi, everyone. This is the Leadership with Heart podcast, and this is Heather Younger, your host. Employee experience and retention is powered by emotions. Managers and or leaders within organizations get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. Leaders, meaning supervisors or above in an organization, drive much of the positive or negative emotions by their actions or inactions, their words, or what they fail to say. When a manager chooses their words and their actions carefully, they exhibit great emotional intelligence. These managers are often thought of as leaders who care, or as I like to call them, leaders with heart. This special brand of leader drives engagement and loyalty simply by being themselves. Are these leaders perfect? Absolutely not. It is in their awareness and sharing with some of their imperfections that we realize their brilliance. In this podcast, I ask you to see yourself from the stories my guests tell about the times when they were not the best versions of themselves, but how they used their hearts to guide them to a place of deeper connection with their teams and heightened leadership prowess. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you to follow us on Twitter at Customer Fanatics. That's customer and then Fanatix. And also just follow me on LinkedIn at Heather Younger. That is because I'm in the process of writing a book based upon this podcast, which will have amazing stories of those on the show. And I'm going to be going a little deeper too, so you will not want to miss it. But I'll be putting out tidbits, asking for feedback related to the book cover and just ideas and colors. I want you to be a part of that. I want you to lend your voice to that. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at customerfanatics.com, and you'll get a couple freebies as well, including the first chapter to my book and some emotional intelligence tips as well. Thank you so much for listening, and hopefully you enjoy this show. Hi, everybody. This is Heather with the Leadership with Heart podcast, and today I am super excited to have Ethan Mann on the show today. The reason why I have him on, I kind of watched him from afar. He's actually a parent at my children's school, but he also is a successful person that's in business and does some really interesting work. I just like his style, and I like the way he embraces the people that are around him. And so, Ethan, that's why you're on the show.
Oh, that's terrific. That's great.
Welcome. Yeah, I always tell people that's a surprise when I tell people why they're here. It was like, what? Oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't know that about myself.
That's good feedback, so I'm happy.
Yes. So where are you right now in your leadership journey?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as you mentioned, I do some interesting things. So I have a kind of a complex background in both sort of technical science, a PhD in microbiology and business. So I just finished an MBA in finance. So I have this situation where I sort of straddle worlds a little bit, and that does kind of put me in a unique situation as far as my leadership style, because I interact with people in all sorts of disciplines, people that are in the business background or people that are in the science background. And I like to think of my experience really as a point where I'm still growing, but I certainly understand that I value opinions, and I understand that I value opinions to the point where I realize that in the moment, I might not understand what my colleagues' opinions might mean or the value of those opinions. So I take them with a pretty open heart, and then I try and learn from that. And so I feel like I've had a decent amount of experience, but I'm still on a path to learning and ultimately getting to a point where I feel like I'm a more mature leader, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I always talk about on the show that leadership journey, and sometimes we regress a little bit. So we start off one place and we're young and eager, and we're trying to set our mark, and we sometimes don't know where the guardrails are, and then we get mature and we realize some of it, and then sometimes we go kind of turn backward, and that's what it's about. It is literally the learnings that we get in that journey towards just becoming that best leader, but we will never arrive at the destination. That's kind of the
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yep.
So how would people that work with you actually describe your leadership style? Like, how would they describe it?
I think the biggest feedback I've got on that, which is a little surprising to me, maybe, as time has gone by, I guess I'm a little more accepting of it. But typically they describe it as sort of very even keel. So I don't get too high and I don't get too low. And it's very difficult to get me to respond with surprise. And I think that's a little bit due to the fields that I'm in, especially in science. So I came up in the academic science world, and in academic science, there's this little secret where that very few people outside of academic science understand, and that's that things generally really rarely work out. So most of the time stuff doesn't work, and occasionally it does work. So when somebody comes to me with something that didn't go the way they thought it was going to go, I'm usually not that surprised because it's almost how I anticipate things are going to go anyway. So I don't get too low, right, when things don't work out the way they go. And I also know that when somebody comes to me with feedback or a response that, was over the top or something, really went, how they feel is something that was really fruitful, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic. Okay, I understand we're excited, but I've seen, things go poorly before. And so I try and maintain sort of a steady foundation. And so that's typically what people see, which is interesting. So that's the biggest feedback I get from my colleagues around me is that, man, you're always very steady.
How do you think, which obviously, I think actually I look to the people now because I'm a very high strung type person, very energetic. And I actually look to and love to be around those who are kind of even killed, more steady, more calm in their, just everything, their process and just who they are. And so I bet you that's something that's really makes the people that are around you probably feel better and not as anxious and things, I guess, about things that are going on. But I would be curious to know, with the mindset of not being very surprised, and when people come to you with like, oh no, like what was me? I would love to know maybe how you respond to people. Like, do you feel like because of that lens, do people ever perceive you as like not being as empathetic when you are that way? Or are you able to still kind of see where they might be disappointed and empathize? Or, I'm just kind of curious, especially in science. I have one of those in my house and he actually is highly empathetic, probably way more than most people in science, I bet you. But I'm kind of curious to know, how that might impact you, just having that certain lens. Finance, science, pretty a matter of fact, not a lot of touchy feeling.
Right. No, exactly. That's the thing that I typically try to overcome is that if I'm interacting with somebody, I try and display a little bit more emotion if that's sort of important for the circumstance. And that's something that I just know about myself, that I often will come across as not very empathetic, right? So sometimes I have to intentionally try and do things to take additional time or ask additional questions so that I can convey that caring attitude in a different way than maybe an emotional response or a look on my face or something like that, so that there's still that interaction, right? But it's just coming in a different way. And so there are times when I do that well, and there are times when I don't take that time to really focus on that moment or that circumstance, and that can be a detrimental thing that I just still work on. And I think that's part of the areas that we continue to grow. And I think it's pretty interesting, though, in the last several years, really how I've been able to identify sort of areas where, people are perceiving me maybe differently than I would have guessed or than I intend to, which is interesting.
Yes. And that happens a lot with executive leaders in particular, where sometimes you might be removed from the business, or you were in the business, then you had to remove yourself just because of, the business grows, the idea of like the entrepreneur and then the growth to a scalable business. And so then perceptions change because, wait a second, we were closer to him before and now he's further away. So now we don't know what he's thinking. We don't know what's going on. So there's all that stuff that happens from a distance that people are perceiving, and leaders aren't necessarily taking that into account, because what's happening also in most cases is now they're that leader who maybe had to scale the business, if they were able to still remain in that business, is now like looking more at the people at the top, and they're trying to talk to the board, or they're trying to talk to their colleagues, or they're trying to talk, their CEO or whatever that is. So they're not as much, they sometimes aren't as engaged then with the people that they did initially have contact with. So that's interesting that you say that. I bet you there may be, there's some of that dynamics that plays out. And then again, just the lens. We all have so many different lenses. I mean, I think about, so I love, I teach DISC, which is like the communication behavioral style training. And one of the things I love, I talk about the C, and the C person who has the behavioral style is the one who is compliant. They tend to be more conscientious of procedures, and they like data, and they like numbers, and they like accuracy. So it tends to be the scientist or the finance person. I love C's because I'm not. I'm very low on my C. And I think it's important for us to see that there's all these differences in leadership styles, but we can learn to work together and like try to, fill in each other's gaps, I guess, if that's how you want to call it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I love the differences in us. I think it's when we talk about diversity of personality, right? I just love that difference. So, So where do you think your drive to lead comes from? Most of us can kind of point back to a story or a series of events or a person. Where do you think your drive to lead comes from?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I would sort of categorize myself as someone who's just always been interested in leading. Maybe I was born sort of interested in that leadership role. I think I really found it kind of strengthened through athletics. So I enjoy athletics. I love almost anything competition related, especially team sports. I played college football, and that requires a lot of teamwork and a lot of different personalities, which has always been interesting. But there's also a lot of different leadership styles, even within the team, that's so interesting and important. And I've never been a rah-rah vocal leader. I've always been an action leader. And that probably fits with my sort of even keel nature that I've already described. But it's, somebody that's doing things correctly all the time, somebody who tries to be, leading as far as how things should be done and is out in front, physically, maybe performing a certain way in the athletic field, maybe getting things done in the business world, maybe ahead of schedule or ahead of time, or providing, framework for how people can provide their own feedback or provide their own deliverables. And so I think that's where I sort of have found my niche within leadership. And it probably developed most through my athletics. And to this day, I still think athletics are important for a lot of the youth out there, because they have an ability to interact in this sort of athletic microcosm that's so dynamically different than, traditional school setting, but it has such corollaries to the working world.
Love that word, microcosm. That is so true. I have the 3 boys, and they're just, they're just crazy how they have to, even with just in the household, when you have like a larger family, and how just the leadership in the family and how everybody has to work together to get things done, or else everything starts to just break down. And it's that same thing in the workplace. It's the same thing in sports. And so, I think I do agree that working together inside of teams. And I also think that, there's a lot, we underestimate the leader who is action focused. Because as I talk about with that DISC model, there are those who get things done and drive things forward. And if we had none of those, there would be there'd be people just so focused on data, they can't get themselves out of the weeds. There'd be people that are just so focused on relationships and people that, again, all you're doing is just talking and having fun and socializing and loving each other so much, but you're still not working. And so there has to be a good mix of all the people that really drive that bus forward inside the workplace, for sure. Right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the things that I've also found through the type of work I do in sort of in-depth science and then finance is that it can be very complex to sort of see the direction. But I've always found that maybe easier than some of my colleagues. So it's in defining the unknown is very helpful for actually moving towards execution. And so providing that sort of critical skill set in a certain circumstance can actually really propel action in those around us that maybe their skill set is on the executional side, or maybe it's on a different organizational side or something like that, as opposed to sort of defining an end deliverable that's of critical value, and how to leverage pieces to make that happen. Those are the things that I think begin to propel a leader who has that sort of lead by action propensity. And so I think that's where I see sort of my career moving in that direction, even on a really a day-to-day basis, or as I interact with my colleagues in my field.
Do you feel that when the name of a podcast is Leadership with Heart, and I always tell people that more the people on the show, they're either referred to me or handpick them, and I'm looking at folks that seem to be a little bit more on the emotional intelligence side. So they have not just the IQ portion of it, but they got the EQ portion, where they are people who can pick up on the emotions of others, who maybe respond to the emotions of others, those who do inspire people to move, to change, and are really good with adapting to change and things like that. There's a lot of different components that go into emotional and social intelligence, but I do pull people in depending on the different facets they might bring. Do you feel like the lens that you have, that kind of action-driven, more deliverable focused type of lens, again, scientific finance, still lends itself to heart-based leading?
I think it does. And it might be a little bit of a departure for me in this area. But the way I connect with people emotionally and try and be understanding of different circumstances or folks' different background, it's really through a core value of the human character and the human circumstance. So I value life intensely. I value people's experiences and both the positive and negative connotations that come with that, because that's the reality. And so I do that in connecting with people. Really, I try and focus on not only that action-based leadership, but the service-based leadership. So how can, what can I do for you? How can I help you? If that's listening to a circumstance or making sure that your schedule fits so that you can spend time with your family because your family is the important thing to you, or so that you can, engage in a volunteer activity outside of work that moves you or that allows you to drive sense and purpose in your life in a different way. All of that I think is critical. And how do we meet people where they're finding their true value in life? And I really value that. And I tell people this all the time. That's not something you can fake. You can't tell somebody, yes, I support your volunteer activities, but when they come to you and they're asking for some flexibility and you're not able to give it to them, that's really the last chance you're probably going to get to really actually support that for them. And those are the things that you really have to meet people there. And if it requires some amount of flexibility, it's probably going to be uncomfortable. Otherwise it wouldn't be important. It has to be uncomfortable, then that's where that value comes. And so for me, again, it's difficult for me to reach an IQ scale or an EQ scale, verbally. It has to happen really almost through action, or almost through how I interact with my colleagues or those that I'm, on the leadership path with. And so that's kind of how I see that, and that at least at this point, that's probably evolving. And maybe as I generate a larger skill set, I'll be able to tap into that. But that's today the best way that I'm able to participate.
Well, I think it's amazing. I mean, in the end, when we talk about emotional intelligence, self-awareness is the doorway to that. So you being aware that maybe verbally it's not going to come out, it's not your natural tendency to do it, you'll have to work harder at it, but that you also are aware and working on the kind of how your actions impact those people that are around you by, like you said, allowing more flexibility at work and making sure that they're finding the purpose. And so in some ways, by you doing that, you're inspiring them as well. You're being adaptable to the change that's happening around you, because their life and all your people's lives are just moving fluidly, right? And we just have to adapt to that. And so those leaders that adapt more are going to be more emotionally intelligent. So I think that's great. I just was curious to know what you thought about it. So for the listeners, this is like a critical one right here. For the listeners, I think they can see why I had you on the show, and you're definitely one that's different than one I've had on, but I definitely think you belong here. So welcome to the Leadership with Heart tribe. So when it comes to like a time when you feel like with your leadership, you were not that best version of you. You maybe weren't the person who listened well and responded appropriately, or met people where they were and helping them find their purpose. And if you can tell a specific story that helps the people more, everybody else listen. We end up learning more when you do that. So do that for us. Share a story, and then tell us what you did to kind of come out of that place where you weren't maybe as proud of yourself as a leader, and then boom, like you did something that really opened it up for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough one, both for me to kind of remember and to both kind of be critical about how my leadership, journey has gone. Certainly, I think there's numerous instances where you kind of step away and you go, I probably could have handled that maybe better than I did for a number of reasons. But I think probably
it doesn't have to be recent. It can even be something earlier on in your career.
Yeah, no problem. I think I'm picking at this point. So I think I'm picking a circumstance that kind of happened over a period of time. And this, as I was kind of coming up in this organization that I'm with now, which is a kind of a startup environment in biomedical technology and medical device field. But we were a pretty tight-knit team. And I had a few direct reports that, really valued the culture and the tight-knit nature of the culture. And we were, pretty routinely under some pretty tight deadlines, trying to hit deliverables that no one else really in the world has ever done before, natural of sort of an innovative startup community. And so we were trying to have to figure out from scratch what we're needing to do and how we're needing to do it to meet a deliverable that maybe there was some promises associated around. So it's a pressure situation. And sort of to offset this type of environment or to build around that type of environment where there's a lot of passion, we had started doing kind of a Friday afternoon kind of cocktails and happy hour, event, maybe, I guess you'd call it, or tradition. And so that was built, it was great for building a lot of team environment. And so we'd started getting, maybe it'd been several weeks we'd been kind of doing this where we'd kind of go over to a local brewery and maybe have a beer together and kind of recount kind of how the week went, what people were hearing, give them a chance, give folks, either my direct reports or others around, maybe on the same level or others, a chance to kind of interact and connect outside of the normal deliverable, do you have this done yet kind of meeting style, so that we could share our different perspectives. And it was tremendously successful, but it began to bleed over into our work life during the week. And so I really had a tough time balancing that sort of social environment with sort of the management boundaries that needed to occur as well. And then other my colleagues' direct reports were having trouble understanding, maybe what the relationship was like. And I don't think that it was necessarily, I would still to this day argue that it's not necessarily the social environment that was the issue. It was just how it was handled, or how maybe, the things that we were talking about, or the conversation and the nature of the conversation during a social outing versus maybe how we needed to have the boundaries and make it a clear distinction about, kind of what was social time versus kind of what was, work time. Because in other circumstances, that didn't necessarily happen. And it's not like it got out of control. It just began to blur lines and boundaries during the work environment. And I often look back at that and think, what are the kinds of things that, on a sort of interpersonal level with a few of these folks that really we had not, some of these issues emerge. What are the things that could have been done to kind of position ourselves in a way so that we maintained both the social side of things and the sort of management, boundaries, deliverables boundaries, and requirements of a work environment that are necessary also to maintain sort of productivity and functionality and all those things. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that comes to mind. And it comes up in my mind, kind of on occasion.
So like when the lines are blurred, how did you guys figure out how to move past it? Did you just stop doing the happy hour thing, or did you have to write up policies? I'm so curious.
Yeah. So I stopped attending. what also happened during that time, I was sort of moving up into some more organizational roles and control of kind of a broader operations role among the organization. So I was beginning to, move into roles that were a little bit above where I was at when we kind of started that. So I kind of excused myself or kind of pulled away a little bit while still encouraging the staff to go and kind of regroup at the end of the week and enjoy themselves and be able to, kind of encourage that kind of social interaction so they could kind of diffuse some of their stress and some of the passion that came with the work side of things, and also kind of connect interpersonally about, maybe interests that occur outside of work. And, on that side of things, it's been pretty fruitful because people, from work would engage to go to concerts together or maybe go camping or put together a hiking group on Saturday morning, just due to having that Friday interaction, which is, those are invaluable experiences and gives people, that social connection as well. But it just wasn't, it began to be too difficult for me to continue to participate in that event, maybe because of the history of that event. Other social events, still we would attend or, and there was a lot of connection there still, but it just wasn't quite the same because of that, because it's sort of how it had evolved or kind of developed over the time.
That's interesting when, moving up in the organization, how that role changes and how you still have to kind of maintain a connection. So that's one of the questions I have is, what do you do to connect directly with the people that you lead? So what are the types of things that you do to connect more deeply with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think now the biggest thing that I do is make sure that I understand sort of what are their interests outside of work. So what are their skill sets? What are their hobbies? And then kind of harkening back to what I was talking about earlier in that, really truly valuing people's interests and their human perspective or their human condition, outside of, any of where you think you can leverage their skill sets and all the other leadership things that kind of come into play in a leader's mind, just on their core, what are the things that moves them the most? Do they have a family? Do they have kids? Are they interested in further education? Are they interested in becoming an executive someday? Or are they an individual contributor? What are those types of things? And then trying to seek them out and have conversations on occasion where, it's more than discussing the weather, or it's more than discussing, the latest outcome from some, local sports team or something like that. It's more than that. It's how, your kids are starting school, right? Or, did you have a birthday recently? I saw you had a birthday, at home, and are the kids in sports or things like that try and find out, what, especially people you worked with for 6 or 7 years, there's things that change in their lives. And, are you involved in a home remodeling project or something? How's that going? And, share kind of similar experiences in that regard where I have kids, I'm doing home remodeling projects. I have, these sorts of same connections so that, you can find common ground and meet people where their passions are at. I just have found, maybe because I've found as I'm coming up, I still look at the leaders that have been around me that responded to me that way and took time to try and understand what I was interested in. Usually have to draw it out a little bit because, people are like, oh, you're too busy for me. Like, no, I want to know. I want to know what things are going in your life right now that are, that have you, that are piquing your interest or that, have you concerned or whatever the case may be. And so typically it's probably a lot of the same things that I'm, that are, could be the same things that are going on for me. And so I think those are the easiest areas. Those are easy wins. And with, the interconnectivity on the internet and social media, typically it's pretty easy to kind of understand, hopefully where people are at or what's going on.
So for those who are listening and maybe they're just at a crossroads in their leadership, or maybe they're kind of going through some of that transitional thing where either they're moving up, they're moving out, there's, just things happening in their leadership journey. I'd love to know what maybe a pearl of wisdom, something you might leave them with. It just helps them, gives them a little extra oomph they need to get through after listening to the show.
Yeah, sure. I think I totally appreciate that question. I I really like tangible advice or actionable advice that folks have had, or people that have gone through sort of growth and have looked towards action advice. And so the biggest thing I would say is, I think to advance as a leader, you really should engage in service-oriented leadership. And so if you are at a point where you're, still kind of sifting out maybe where you fall as a leader, or you want to try some of your leadership potential, and you maybe move a little outside your comfort zone even, which is a great thing to do, I really would suggest engaging in service-oriented volunteering activities. And so for a couple of reasons, I think it gives you an opportunity oftentimes to, maybe exist in an environment outside of what you're used to on a day-to-day basis. So on a day-to-day basis, maybe you're somebody that fills a specific role. Maybe you're a project manager, or maybe you're an accountant, and you have certain roles and responsibilities associated with that title. But in your service organization, maybe you're not that at all. Maybe you're somebody who coordinates, or maybe you put on events. And so you have ability to expand your skill set and interact with people differently. The other thing that I tell people in sort of an early or mid-career, mid-leadership type experience is that service-oriented volunteering is typically the best mechanism you can get to sit next to sit at a table next to a VP at an event, maybe for a couple hours. Maybe that VP's at a different organization, maybe they're in a different field altogether, but then all of a sudden you're communicating with them, you share experiences, you're learning with them, and they're doing the same job you're doing at this experience, right? So maybe you're at a United Way event, or maybe you're helping with a 5K or something like that. And so you're participating for a period of time with somebody in a field that's outside of where your current role is. And maybe you're telling VPs what to do. I don't know, but these are things that give you an experience. And then all of a sudden, these other leaders are noticing how confident you are as a leader, or how you have certain skill sets that are maybe different. And then you get to know them on a different level, and it opens up other opportunities. And I think it's just a great way, because it's you're not at a quote unquote classical networking event. You're at a volunteering event. So you're not out looking for your next role. You're not out looking for somebody to do something for you. You're out in a service role, meeting people in a capacity where you share similar interests. And I just think that's just such a clear win for being able to really expand, things that you're able to do. And oftentimes it does take a little bit of motivation to get going. But when you do it, it's also very rewarding.
Oh, that's awesome. And that makes sense, is, try to expand your view. It's easy. It's sometimes when you're in that stuck place, getting out of the place you're at and expanding your view of the world by getting outside the organization and volunteering in other organizations with other people that are at the same or even higher level. And then you're able to kind of see things maybe further than what your current situation is. So I really like that as a kind of a tangible thing that leaders can do to kind of move past the next place. So I definitely appreciate your time. For those who are listening, hopefully you took away some nuggets from what Ethan shared with us. Again, in order for us to get the word out about the show, but also have people be able to hear all of the genius that happens on the show with the people that are coming on, you have to rate and review on iTunes or Apple or wherever you listen, and that helps to bring it up in the algorithm. So please do that. And also, don't forget to also refer people to me. I've had amazing people call me and reach out to me from the show who are listening every week, and they have referred. So thank you for that. It's just been really good learnings as a result of that. And Ethan, thank you so much for being on the show as well. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoy the conversation. It's great.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership with Heart podcast. You can grab the show notes by visiting customerfanatics.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter.